Mid-1970s American cars are often remembered as peculiar, awkward, and sometimes misunderstood machines, born in a period when Detroit was undergoing seismic changes. They are machines of compromise, artifacts of an era when external pressures, from fuel shortages to government regulations, forced a once-proud industry to redefine itself, often clumsily. For many enthusiasts, the golden age of American muscle effectively ended in 1973, the year the oil crisis reshaped priorities and the horsepower race came to a screeching halt. But dismissing everything after that year as unworthy would be unfair, because even in the midst of crisis and compromise, Detroit still found ways to produce vehicles that, while perhaps not as thrilling as their predecessors, remain fascinating windows into the time. One such example is the Mercury Montego MX Brougham, a mid-tier luxury car that exemplifies the contradictions and curiosities of 1970s American motoring. Even the name itself tells a story. Montego MX Brougham. What a mouthful. In an era when image was everything, manufacturers leaned heavily on names that promised prestige, often borrowing from a romanticized past. The term Brougham originally referred to a style of horse-drawn carriage designed in the 19th century, a dignified and enclosed coach meant for those who could afford comfort. By the time the automobile age arrived, Detroit automakers were quick to appropriate the term, using it as shorthand for luxury. General Motors was especially fond of the word, plastering it across Cadillacs, Oldsmobiles, and Buicks. Soon Ford, Chrysler, and AMC followed suit. Adding Brougham to a model name implied an air of sophistication, even if underneath the vinyl roof and opera windows sat the same basic sedan as the base model. The Mercury Montego MX Brougham then wasn't just a car, it was marketing wrapped in sheet metal, an attempt to convince buyers that they were purchasing more than just transportation, but a taste of exclusivity. This second generation of Montego emerged from a different world than the one its predecessor inhabited. The first Montego, introduced in the late 1960s, was born in a time when automakers faced few restrictions. Engines were big, powerful, and relatively unregulated. The full breadth of Ford's V8 lineup was available, from mild small blocks to thundering 428s, and the cars they powered were unfettered by emissions controls or safety regulations. Horsepower was king, and styling was bold, often prioritized over practicality. Driving was about freedom and performance, and Detroit was more than happy to build cars that reflected that ethos. By contrast, the Montego of the mid-1970s had to contend with a radically changed landscape. The 1973 oil crisis sent shockwaves through the industry, forcing manufacturers to reckon with the reality of rising fuel prices and consumer demand for efficiency. At the same time, new federal mandates on safety and emissions fundamentally altered how cars were designed and built. The Montego was a product of these pressures, and it showed. Gone were the unrestrained styling flourishes of the late 1960s, replaced by bulky 5 mph impact bumpers required by law, jutting appendages that disrupted the car's lines but promised to survive low-speed crashes without costly repairs. Catalytic converters became standard, ushering in a new era of emissions equipment that strangled engines of their once proud power. Safety features multiplied, adding weight and complexity. It was a sobering reality for both automakers and consumers. Cars could no longer be designed with reckless abandon. Under the hood of this particular Montego sat a 351 cubic inch Cleveland V8, one of Ford's more celebrated small block designs. Introduced in 1969, the Cleveland was known for its canted valve cylinder heads and excellent breathing characteristics, traits that made it a favorite among performance enthusiasts. In its prime, it was capable of delivering well over 300 horsepower, a muscular engine that could hold its own against Chevrolet's small blocks and Chrysler's LA series. But by 1974, the Cleveland's glory days were over. Emissions regulations choked its output, detuning what was once a potent mill into something barely recognizable. In this Montego, the 351 was rated at around 160 horsepower, a far cry from its former self. To add insult to injury, this was the final year of Cleveland production for most passenger cars, marking the end of an era. Confusion often arises between the Cleveland and its sibling, the Windsor. Both displaced 351 cubic inches, but the Windsor had a taller deck height and narrower block, making it more common and longer-lived in Ford's lineup. The Cleveland, with its broader block and performance-oriented head design, was the more exotic of the two, but also the more short-lived. By the mid-1970s, it was already being phased out, its promise dimmed by the realities of regulation. For enthusiasts today, owning a Cleveland-powered car is something special, even if the mid-1970s variants lacked the fire of their earlier counterparts. On paper, the performance of the Montego MX Brougham was dismal. At nearly 3,900 pounds, it was a heavy car, weighed down by luxury trimmings and mandated safety gear. With only 160 horses under the hood, acceleration was leisurely at best. The quarter mile took an eternity compared to the muscle cars of just a few years prior, and top speed was limited more by aerodynamics and gearing than by raw power. But to judge the Montego solely by these numbers would be missing the point. This was not a car built to dominate drag strips or carve mountain roads. It was a car built to deliver comfort, style, and a sense of occasion to its owner. Its mission was different, and in that context, it succeeds. The example under discussion here is especially intriguing because of its condition. With just over 10,600 miles on the odometer, it has averaged little more than 200 miles per year since new. That kind of preservation is rare for any car, let alone one from the mid-1970s, when many vehicles were treated as disposable appliances rather than cherished heirlooms. The low mileage explains the car's stunning appearance. The gold paint gleams as though it were still on the showroom floor, while the brown leather interior shows barely any wear. Step inside and you're transported back to a time when earth tones ruled automotive design, when manufacturers believed that colors like avocado green, harvest gold, and deep brown communicated sophistication. Today, we might chuckle at these palettes, but in their time, they were the height of fashion. Sitting in the Montego's plush seats, surrounded by wood-grain applique and padded vinyl, one can almost hear the echoes of AM radio and the soft thud of a closing land yacht door. Asking price for this time capsule is $16,900, or best offer. Whether it's worth it is a matter of perspective. On the one hand, 1970s American cars rarely command high values compared to their 1960s predecessors. The market favors muscle, chrome, and performance, and cars from the Malaise era have long been overlooked. On the other hand, rarity and condition count for much in the collector world, and a Montego MX Brougham with such low mileage is undoubtedly rare. Add in the fact that it represents a pivotal moment in automotive history, and suddenly the price seems not just reasonable but perhaps even a bargain for the right buyer. If nothing else, it's the kind of car that would look right at home in a museum, preserved as an artifact of an era when America's auto industry was forced to adapt, stumble, and eventually evolve. To appreciate cars like the Montego, one has to understand the cultural context of the time. The mid-1970s were marked by uncertainty and change. The optimism of the post-war boom had faded, replaced by economic challenges, energy crises, and shifting social priorities. The automobile, once a symbol of unrestrained freedom, became a focus of regulation and practicality. Buyers wanted comfort and efficiency rather than outright power. Automakers scrambled to adjust, often retrofitting old platforms with new equipment rather than designing from scratch, leading to compromises in style and performance. The Montego embodies these compromises. A car that still aspired to luxury but was weighed down by circumstance. Yet, there is a charm in that compromise. The big chrome bumpers, though ungainly, tell the story of a nation trying to reconcile safety with style. The detuned engine, though underwhelming, represents the first steps toward cleaner air and greater responsibility. The plush interiors, with their pillow-like seats and muted tones, reflect a culture that valued comfort as an antidote to broader societal anxieties. In many ways, the Montego and its contemporaries are more honest than the muscle cars that preceded them. They wear their limitations openly, products of a difficult time that demanded adaptation. For collectors today, cars like this Montego offer something muscle cars cannot: authenticity. They are time capsules that capture a specific moment in history, unfiltered and unembellished. Driving one is less about speed and more about experience. It's about gliding down the road in a golden-hued cruiser, the V8 humming softly, the world passing by through the haze of 70s styling. It's about remembering that not every car has to be a fire-breathing monster to matter. Some cars matter simply because they existed, because they carried families, because they reflected their times. And that is why this Montego MX Brougham, in all its brown and gold glory, deserves attention. It may not stir the soul the way a 1970 Boss 429 Mustang does, but it stirs something else. Curiosity, nostalgia, respect. It reminds us that the story of American cars is not just about the highs, but also about the struggles, the adaptations, and the persistence of an industry determined to survive. In its quiet way, this Mercury tells that story better than most.